Okay.
Hi, Dr. David.
Hey, Tammy, thank you. And hello, everybody. I'm Dr. David Fawcett. I'm part of the Seeking Integrity team here. And some of you may be used to seeing Scott here tonight, but we're delighted to have Tammy here.
Thank
So
you.
thank you. I didn't know who was going to be here. I knew Scott was under the weather. So here we are. Thank you so much. And I always enjoy it when you're here too.
Likewise, I told the group, I said, I always learn something new. Your wealth of information, it just boggles my mind. So it's great.
Oh, good. Thank you. So my expertise, for those of you who don't know me, is chemsex, so that's fused or paired use of drugs and sexual behavior. Lust, Men, and Meth is my book. A little cheap, shameless plug. It's available on audiobook, Audible, and all kinds of things too. So,
And let's talk, you're writing a new book, aren't you?
I am writing a new book. This book, Lust, Men, and Meth, really focuses on paired drug use and sex, particularly methamphetamine, among gay men. And of course, that pairing of drugs and sex is not just a gay thing. There's straight men who use cocaine and see an escort, or a woman sex addict who smokes a lot of marijuana and then acts out, or whatever. It can happen to anybody of any gender and any sexual orientation and almost any drug and behavior. So I am writing a new book that's going to be much more generally applied to everybody and talk about not just meth so much, but all drugs and how drugs and sex interact into this paired drug addiction. So that should hopefully be out later, by the end of the year, hopefully, fingers crossed.
He's had more time to write and he's been focused on writing. So I'm actually hopeful and fairly confident of the time frame.
Yeah. One of the things that took a whole lot of my time before was traveling to different presentations and conferences and preparing those talks and stuff. And that's all kind of on hold right now. So I have a lot of time. So it's been working out well. So the way I format this webinar is just to talk for 10 minutes or so at the beginning about a topic, and then people can choose to share about anything they want, but can be about that topic or about other things. And oftentimes, lately especially, we've been getting really great diverse questions on all kinds of things related to addiction and addictive behaviors and so on. But what I've been trying to talk about, this will be the third week, topic-wise, is really looking at acknowledging some of the change out there that's going on and the changes we've had to adapt and dealing with stress and anxiety. And tonight I just want to talk a little bit about how we can cope with change in a healthy way. And I'll be bold and call it embracing change, which this is the kind of change that a lot of us probably don't want to embrace, but we're kind of being forced on us. And although the circumstances are terrible, there's actually some things we can do to make it better. And there's actually maybe some upsides to it. But it reminds me that, life is change, right? There's nothing that's ever solid. And I've learned that through addiction and through recovery, that really life is all about change. And I think all of us want to return to normal, whatever that is. And I think the scope and impact of this may be that normal is a ways off, at least for a while. We might be doing the shelter in place thing longer than we want, and our travel may not be resumed as quickly as we'd like. And so I think we have to kind of really settle in. At least I was in this kind of sprint mentality. Okay, I can do this for a few weeks and then I'll be back to normal. And, we're already past a few weeks and it's going to be more of a marathon. And so, and that's okay too. But I think really we addicts really avoid change. I mean, if there's one kind of universal definition of addiction, it's avoiding change. I want to avoid uncomfortable feelings, and change just kind of get locked into my little system. So we resist change a lot of times. And there are a couple of things we can do to really build resilience, I think, in circumstances like this. One is to really look at our level of control. I think a lot of times we get a little panicky when we feel like, my God, I have no control in the situation. It's overwhelming me. We can become a victim. We can become powerless in the bad way, not taking steps on our own behalf, just kind of feeling overwhelmed and kind of throwing the towel. And even in a bad situation like this, I think if we take a look at it, there's a lot of things we actually do have control over. We know with a lot of certainty, really, how this virus is spread, right? And if we just follow some things, we can really go a long way toward making ourselves safe. If we're careful about surfaces, if we limit our social contact, if we practice physical distancing. And I really like this separation. There's a footnote on social media now where they talked about social distancing and getting rid of that term. So we have physical distancing, but we are emotionally connected. And we're doing it like we're doing it tonight. So we can wash our hands. We don't touch our face. We can wear masks. We can do a lot of things. So there's, in many ways, my destiny is much more in control, in my own control, than I might think it is. Is it the way I want to live? No, not necessarily right now. But it's not like I don't have any control over what happens. I can control myself. Now, I live in a state where we haven't had the uniform lockdown. Just today we finally did, and that's going to be a good thing. But one of the things I know from program is I can really only control myself. And so I'm taking those steps, and I'm doing what I can to keep myself and the people I love safe. And so that's one thing. The next thing is self-care. And I think this always goes with addiction and recovery, is really learning how to take care of ourselves in a big way. And I think one of those ways that comes up right now, I think, is not pushing away feelings. So I myself have had some anxiety. I've had a lot of grief that has come up for me in this time because I've lived through a couple other big epidemics, notably the HIV epidemic. And so there's a lot of echoes and reminders and triggers that are happening. And I really, although they're uncomfortable, I think it's really important to feel those feelings, to talk about them with other people, and to really, and my belief about feelings is that they're meant to be felt, give us some kind of information, and release them, let them go through. We don't hang on to those feelings, especially grief isn't good for us. Other kinds of self-care, I realized I can take things I've learned in my recovery and apply it to the situation. So I actually know that I have quite a bit more resilience than I thought I would have had. I can be creative about solutions. I can ask for help. I can offer help. I can be kind. There's a lot of just ways of living that make this easier, both for me and everybody around me. And by the way, I can always get professional help too. And I think that's an important thing. It's one thing to check in with our sponsors and our meetings and be well connected. And just sometimes, even for mental health providers, it's important to find other mental health providers sometimes that can be objective or informed and can give us tools. I think the important thing that besides insight that a therapist can do is give you tools and resources. And it may be that we need those more at this time than some other time. I know myself, when I'm under stress, I kind of have a tendency to kind of forget my tools. They kind of go dark on me. And I need somebody maybe to remind me, oh yeah, I can do that. And it's not rocket science, sometimes just a suggestion that I forgot about in all my stress. So that's another thing. Third, monitor your thinking patterns. This is a time when we're under stress, when we can fall into what a therapist would call cognitive errors, right? There's these ways of thinking that don't really do us a lot of favors. So an example of this would be black and white thinking. It's either this or it's that. It's either we all do this or we're all going to die. This kind of false choice between stuff. And there's a whole lot of gray area. So black and white thinking is one thing. A big one, times like this, catastrophizing. I think it's really important not to kind of go over the deep end. This is a really serious situation, and probably the most serious situation I've, societally, that we've faced in maybe a century. Who knows? It's going to be bad, but we have a lot of resources. Despite all I don't watch the news too much. That's one of my self-care techniques. But when I do see, there's just so much creative energy in this country, and labs and people, and we have just such ingenuity and smarts. And I think that's going to help. I don't know if it's going to be a white knight on a horse, but it's sure going to help. And I think we have a whole lot of talented people working on this. And I was really kind of thrilled to read that scientists around the world are kind of all collaborating. Territoriality is out the window, and people are just finding a solution in a way that we haven't seen before. So that's kind of all cool stuff too. The other thing too, jumping to conclusions is another cognitive error that I do, where it's like I see a few things, a little bit of data, and I jump to a conclusion. And I think we need to be careful and take it, just step by step, very carefully. And then finally, in terms of thinking patterns that I find helpful, just to be realistic and do some reality testing. So if I have a fear, and many times fears are irrational, most times probably, I'll check it out with somebody, and I check it out with a couple of people, and just kind of, it helps me hear what other people are doing and what they're seeing and how they're feeling. Two more, and then I'll shut up. Another one is stay in the present. I think, and that's something I've had to do all through my recovery, and it's been such an essential tool. But I think we all need to be able to just stay in the here and now and not get trapped up there in the what ifs. And we need to plan. I'm not saying we shouldn't plan for the future. I have a pretty well-stocked food supply now, and I go through hurricanes every year, and I know how to do that. So I'm prepared, but I'm not sitting there in the dark, worried overly in a destructive way about a month from now or a week from now or tomorrow. I'm really trying to stay in the here and now. And honestly, it's hard in these times because we get a lot of fear generating the atmosphere, and we need to know, we need to be informed it's a bad situation, but we need to be able to kind of keep our wits about us. And so staying in the present is one way to help me do that. And the final thing, and it's almost a side effect of this, is to really kind of clarify our priorities. And I think one of the things that happens in a situation like this is we realize what's important to me. Who is important to me? What relationships do I really care about? How do I want to handle this? And, I know my partner and I have been kind of re-examining major decisions, and suddenly things are plausible that we don't like to think about, so we're taking all that into account and realizing what's important. And I think that's one kind of side benefit. And as you were saying, Tammy, when I logged on, I've had more contact with people in the past 2 or 3 weeks than I've had for a year before that, because I'm making a point of checking in with at least one person every day. And it's, when people do that to me, it feels so good. And I have the same gift when I'm able to do that with other people. So those are just some thoughts I've had on kind of emotionally surviving this period we're going through and just coping with change. Change is here. Change is going to continue. We can't get rid of it, but there's certainly things we can do to kind of ride it out a little more comfortably.
It's so funny because I think the first webinar I did with you, you talked about resiliency, and I've pointed some people back to that one because one of the things I learned from you, I always thought people were resilient or they weren't. And you shared that resiliency is really like a muscle that you build. It's something all of us can gain. So it isn't,
right.
If you don't have it, you have some, you just have a little bit, but you can keep working on being more resilient. And I think this is, we're in a worldwide resiliency lesson right now, with the opportunity to do that. I love, the things that you shared. When this first all started, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I get claustrophobic we went to Hawaii once, and I was claustrophobic because you're trapped on an island. So the thought of being trapped in a house is mentally very challenging for me. And I had to get over that. And one of the things I realized, the recovery tools, the serenity prayer, what do I have control of? Nothing outside of my actions and reactions. And as soon as I flipped that switch and just went, I can't change all that other stuff, but I'm going to make everybody and myself miserable if I don't come to terms with this. And I can't live in the fear. That's a bad thing. Like you, I limit my news, and I also make sure that I'm looking for those wonderful stories, where everybody's collaborating on that, or where people are, going above and beyond to do something nice for you. Here in Phoenix, they had a story where the police officers were delivering the laptops so that the school kids, not everybody is blessed to have, the technology to be able to do school at home. And they were out delivering all of those. That was on the news yesterday. I was like, oh, so I'm looking for the input of the good as well. I for myself, I love math. And so every time I get data, I am curious about it. So, when they're throwing out these big numbers and all of this kind of stuff, I was like, what does that mean relatively? And so, I go and do the research of how many people die on an average day in the US. I did all of that. And then it gives me this perspective. For me, having perspective and being grounded in the reality of this is for today, and we don't know how this is all going to come out. I don't think, we've talked about normal, and I think it's going to be a revised version of normal. It will take a long time, if ever, to go back to how it was, but it won't be like this. So it's going to be somewhere in between, you know, on all of that. And I'm trying to be excited about what can happen and the connections we can make. And as humans, how resilient we are and how creative we are, you know, in the process. And that's a good place for me to be, rather than fear and negative. So, the black and white thinking too, that like I learned in recovery, because, you know, I was really good at always and nevers and forevers and all of that. And I had to learn that, you know, very few things are that black and white. There's a lot of, you know, gray in the middle, and to be okay with it. So, so really, really good things. You know, I appreciate the perspective, and I love that you talk about professional help. So, you know, this is free. This is supplemental support. This is not therapy, but there's a lot of therapists. If you don't already have one and you're looking for one, reach out. I know some great people, but there's a lot of therapists have navigated really quickly into doing, you know, the work online. And, you know, is it the same? Probably not quite. You know, I love my personal therapist, and she's got the space, and like it just, I walk in and I feel safe, and I love that, you know, but right now, you know, I'm doing okay. But if I needed her, I'd take her on Zoom any day, you know? So, so please don't, you know, don't hesitate to reach out. You know, like I want us all to get through that. My daughter-in-law is an ER physician in a different city. And she talked about, you know, people that had 20 years of recovery relapsing. And I was like, oh, that's so sad that they leaned into the addiction, which was the problem, rather than leaning into the recovery, which is, you know, the solution. So
that is sad.
Yeah. 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 We've got some questions, Dr. David. So, so the first one, and if you have questions, please add them to the Q&A. The first one is, I am a porn and sex addict. I have been sober 14 days. Yay. Glad you're here. Currently, and today I had to write an email to a childhood friend who emotionally had a stronghold on my life. For the longest, my wife has been wanting me to let this friendship go, but I always gave her a lot of pushback. Is it normal to feel some kind of grief when ending a relationship that has been around for so long, but is not conducive to recovery?
Wow, great question, and congratulations on your time. Yes, I mean, the short answer is, of course, yes. And those relationships, I think this is probably true for everybody, addicts included, that sometimes we carry around or keep with us relationships that are long past doing any good for us or serving us, or in fact, the opposite, are actually harming us. But for whatever reason, we don't want to let them go. And so I think it is an act of love for yourself and for your recovery to find out what those relationships are and make a move to release them. Now that your 14 days is early to do some of that work. So you may want to get some guidance on some of that with a therapist or your sponsor or someone. But I think what you're describing is totally authentic in terms of emotional experience that I've seen and had myself. In that when we do let these relationships go, even if they didn't serve us particularly well, there's a little bit of a loss where they were connected to us. And that's normal. And I think the important thing is to acknowledge that as normal, acknowledge the grief, talk about it, and release the grief along with that relationship. So yeah, good for you. I think it's a beautiful stand on your own behalf and on your own recovery. And yeah, sometimes we need to do that. I think, you know, particularly addicts, I think, have a tendency to carry around a lot of these ghosts of the past in our heads, right? These old relationships, sometimes people that were abusive or bullies or neglectful or you know, harmful in some way. And for whatever reason, even if they're not in our lives physically anymore, they certainly occupy some psychological space. And I think that's a really important thing you've done, to do that and release it. And I think it's a good step. It's a good gesture. I think those kind of acts in recovery, especially early recovery, are almost like acts of kindness for yourself, right? It's taking care of yourself and kind of cleaning house a little bit in terms of relationships. I certainly had to clean house when I got into recovery, because a lot of my relationships in my life, and it made sense because I was basically a whack job, to use a clinical term. And so the people I attracted in my life were also whack jobs. And so I mean, there were a lot of craziness and drama and stuff that didn't serve me well. And I was pretty clear on that pretty early on, and I was able to release a lot of that and replace them. And this is the other half of what I want to say to you. You're not just losing something, you're going to replace that with a healthier relationship, hopefully, with someone, and get that newer supportive network that you need, and we all need to get by.
Yeah, and I thought when I was reading it too, that you recognize that it had an emotional stronghold on your life. I mean, I really give you a lot of credit, because early in recovery, I don't think I could have like even identified any of those. Like, that was way too deep for me to even think about. Like, I might have thought maybe this relationship isn't very good for me, whatever. Like David, I had a lot of not great relationships in my life at the time, and really I had to clean house, but it was very different. I also want to acknowledge your wife's care about this, where, you know, your wife is it seems has a bead on that it was not healthy for you, and had concern about it for you. So you love that she's there for you, and it sounds like rooting for you to do things that will be helpful for you. So yeah, that's good. Okay, next question is, what a spectacular topic and what on-point observations. I have felt more grateful for my addiction and path in recovery than ever right now. Yay! The tools of recovery are all I need to deal with life daily, and it has helped me to more fully integrate those tools into my daily life, which for me is the key to maintaining sobriety and growing in my humanity. Thank you so much. Wow, love it.
Wow, beautiful statement. Thank you. And you know, it is so true that really I will say, when I got into early recovery, I had no tools for living whatsoever. I reacted. I grew up not learning them, and really I've learned all the basic essentials of how to be a human being in program, and they're all there. You know, all the core elements of how to live a really wonderful, productive life, and it's great to be reminded of that, even in times like this, where, you know, there's a lot of stress out in the world. Program gives us the skills we need to maneuver really any situation. And that's part of my faith about my recovery, is that I know that there's no situation that I can't bring at least some grace to and some wisdom. And, you know, the serenity prayer helps me discern what I can control and what I can't. But I kind of have what I need in terms of the skills. And so, yeah, thank you. I think that's beautiful. And I also love just your wording of growing into my humanity. And I think, you know, we are so much more in recovery than just people who used to be addicts, or were still addicts but not active. You know, there's a certain kind of human depth, I think, that occurs, and a generosity of spirit, and a kindness, and an understanding, and most of all, feeling connection, that we are really all one. I think that's a beautiful experience, and boy, much needed in times like this. So thanks for sharing. It's really wonderful.
Agree. I read an article the other day that was how to apply the 12 steps, you know, in this situation. And the premise was, you know, we've all been through our challenges and chaos, mostly self-created, you know, in our addiction. And so we have these principles that we can apply, you know, in all aspects of our life. So applying it to something that's just a lot bigger. And I was on one of my 12-step meetings, which they've converted to online. It's not the same as going, but it still was helpful. But they were talking about out of the 12 and 12, and they were talking about, you know, during World War II, and they were relating it back, and how the people that were on the front lines, you know, maintained their recovery better than the people that were back home. And it was because they were in this hardship place. And so I was like, well, yes, we have these principles to apply. And when the going gets tough, you know, we can lean into you know, what we are learning. And it's still a journey for me. I keep learning. So, okay. Next question. Hello, I have been porn and masturbation free for 7 months. Yay. Prior to this time, for many years, I was heavy into porn and masturbation, and then it escalated in the last year before I stopped to compulsively look at pictures of young girls and women on the internet. I have experienced porn-induced erectile dysfunction and loss of erection during sex. It seemed to be improving until recently. My question is, can I expect this to go on, or maybe a year or longer? The only way I can be feeding my addiction is out in public. If I see attractive women, I look away immediately, and I humanize them and don't sexualize them. Thank you both for your time. So.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and what you describe is pretty common. There's this thing called pornography-induced erectile dysfunction, and it really is similar to a lot of issues related to stimulant intensity addictions, like porn, like sex addiction, like chemsex, where it really heightens the level of stimulation, and it kind of hijacks the brain to a point where the brain requires that addictive high level of stimulation to get aroused. And when we come back to earth in our recovery, there's a period of time while our brains are kind of readjusting back down to earth with us. And in that time, that we just, without doing addictive behavior, we can't meet the bottom threshold to have arousal. And so what you're describing is quite common, very common, in fact. And it's simply, when we think about porn especially, there's a lot of changing of issues, changing rather of images, one after the other, and oftentimes because of tolerance, which is classic in addiction, which is tolerance simply means that we need more of something to get the same effect. We start to escalate. And so you mentioned a couple kinds of porn you had been looking at, but typically we see people looking at more intense kind of scenes or images or whatever, and to try to get that arousal. And so when we stop, the brain starts to come back down to earth and rewire, and there is a period of time that you have this gap. Now, you were saying it was starting to get better. It's not necessarily a linear process. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and kind of comes and goes. But there is, overall, you can expect a trajectory of improvement, right? It should be getting better with some regularity. One thing that I find, and you seem like you're pretty good about this, but when I've had clients for whom it wasn't improving, we would talk, and they were fantasizing more. They weren't acting out necessarily. They weren't using drugs and sex. They weren't looking at porn, and they weren't going out with an affair partner or anything like that. But in their minds, sometimes they would kind of let their brains go to these kind of addictive places or scenarios or fantasies, even briefly. And that keeps that part of the brain alive and kind of dominant. And so you really have to not undermine yourself by doing that and trying to find, and it's frustrating for people, by the way, because sometimes there's nothing. I've had clients who say there's nothing as arousing. Yeah, that's right. While you're in that period, it's going to be that way. But it does come back. It does get better. But that's the one thing I've seen where people slow it down by kind of not being totally pure. Now, it sounds like you're really conscientious about that out in public. And it's so important what you mentioned to look away and humanize them and do all that. But I would give it time. I would really be clean with your program like you are. And I have every belief that it will come around quite quickly for you.
Do you have suggestions, not for this person, but you mentioned that some people can kind of go to that fantasy spot. And I'm kind of thinking that would be easy to not even be conscious that you're doing and all of a sudden find yourself in it. Do you have any suggestions for how to interrupt that cycle?
Yeah, that's a great comment. So I grew up in the North with a lot of snow. And I compare this, we have an arousal template in our head, I'll back up in a minute. And when we have these sexual scenarios, they get filed in our arousal template. And when we do that with addiction, porn addiction, sex addiction, or chemsex, those become really what we call deeply grooved. They're there. And when I'm talking about snow, if you've driven in the snow, you know that your tire kind of goes into that rut of the car that's driven before you. It kind of falls into it. And when we are in recovery and trying to not go there, it's very easy, as Tammy just said, to kind of end up there, where we're not even consciously, because our brain, it's almost like muscle memory. Our brain knows how to do it. It goes there automatically without us thinking about it. And so I think it's very important to, I use the analogy of a path in the woods. If that little area, that scenario is a path out in the woods and we keep going up and down the path, it's going to stay open. You know, one of the things we know about our arousal temperature is once something is there, and this is the tricky part, we can't get rid of it. It's going to kind of stay there. The best we can do is let that path get grown over and just ignore it and find other places to go that aren't connected with our addiction, that are arousing. Now, that's a good point, Tammy. You mentioned how do we do that? And it's hard because those addicted related spots are so bright, they kind of take all the light out of the room. But I have asked clients, maybe what was arousing before you ever got into drugs? You know, what was sexually appealing before you picked up a drug? What are some other ways, other things you might find sexually appealing? Remember, the arousal template can incorporate new things, so we can learn new things that are arousing too. But probably the thing that's been most helpful for clients I've had is to really try not to think about it so much, but really focus on physical sensations, really follow your body. If you're with a partner, or even masturbating, it can be done too, where you just kind of are aware of sensations, physical sensations, touch, temperature, you know, the sensation, as opposed to the head trip, the fantasy, the script that starts to play like a movie in your head. That's what you don't want to do. So you want to kind of do a workaround away from your head into your body. Any way you can engage that. Breathing is a great way to be intentional about sex. Just kind of getting them in, not only in the mood, but kind of focus and get in touch with your body. And it also kind of interrupts that automatic going to those spots. So it takes some patience, but I would really try to avoid that if at all possible. And if you find yourself there, stop in that scenario, because it'll just kind of keep you locked in place.
Thank you. That was very useful. Okay, the next question. This is from a female. I'm trying to do 90 days of abstinence from sexual behavior. I lost my 30 days and now am on day 2, porn and sex with self. I set boundaries with my husband, and we have realized that I cannot even hold hands with him without him getting aroused. I don't know what to do. I am the SLA, and he is not in recovery and has no diagnosed addictions.
Okay, well, good for you for understanding, you know, and it's hard always to have to start your count over again, but it really is important for those reasons. And so, yeah, I mean, day 2 is a hard thing. The boundaries are really important. And I think you too know what is going to work for you. I mean, and every couple, every individual is somewhat different in what can be really triggering. And it may be that for a while you have to not hold hands or do whatever so that you both are comfortable. But it's also important, I think, you need to ask your husband for his support rather, and with helping you in this by not pressuring you or otherwise kind of giving you messages that he would like to get involved. I think it's really important for you to have that space where you don't have the triggers, the pressures, or the need to please or take care of him. You really need to take care of you right now. And so you did the magic word, boundaries. It's going to be about boundaries and communication with him, and taking care of yourself in that. You said he's not in recovery, but he might find some help with, there are groups for spouses of sex addicts, including men who are spouses of sex addicts. So there might be some support for him so that he doesn't have to go through this himself, and so he can see what other guys are doing to deal with situations like this.
And so and even just to have an understanding, because I think this is such a foreign world. If you've never had to deal with addiction, you know, it's just all like, it's just very different. You know, people don't understand this until they have to. So for him to get more information to be able to understand what's going on with your brain, when you're, active in your addiction, and as you're trying to separate from that, I think would be really helpful. And yes, on Tuesday nights, there is a Betrayed Partners men's group, but it's for male partners. And, I would encourage it, but even like joining on this or Dr. Rob's or, any of the information, can be very helpful just to have that understanding.
Right. And I think the more he understands, the easier it's going to be for him and you. So,
yes. Yeah. Okay. Next one. Maybe I should feel hopeful, but I find it discouraging. I am also doing some financial coaching, and I keep getting hit with my crappy mindset, not feeling good enough, feeling like the victim, lack of confidence, feeling frozen, etc. It's like everything in all areas of my life are just screwed up. How can I ever have hope?
Wow. Well, I think I've certainly been in those spots in my life, and I think probably a lot of people have. With addiction, I think we all have these old voices in our heads that we carry around, old beliefs about ourselves. And I think one of the big tasks of recovery is to really try to reverse those somehow. I call them core beliefs, but it's kind of lessons I learned as a kid, that I'm not good enough, or the world isn't safe, or I am unprotected, or no one cares about me, or I'm unlovable, or if people really knew what I was thinking, they wouldn't like me, or, all that stuff that we grew up in. We drew these lessons usually as experiences of our kids. And as we grow up, at least in my experience, I kind of forgot about those consciously. And, I got busy and went to school and got a job, and all life kind of distracted me. But I realized, and I talk about these things as like software in the background. They're running all the time, those old beliefs. And sometimes they're manifested in self-talk, the little voice in your, little chatter in your ear that's, usually undermining and critical. It's like, who are you to think you could do that? And that kind of thing. So really, it's important to identify that self-talk and then work to correct it. And understand that that's based usually on old negative beliefs about ourselves and conclusions we drew about the world, and it's not really relevant or accurate. And so we're kind of succumbing to these old messages that are almost like, echoes of the past. And so one way I think it's useful to overcome those, first of all, to become conscious of them, because this is an unconscious process. It's like in the back of our minds, and we're not even aware of it sometimes. And a lot of people get into their addiction over this because those feelings accumulate, and they, after a while, bog us down. But one really positive way to get past that, I think, is our affirmations, or changing those old core beliefs about myself, that I'm not unsafe. I can make good choices, or I can protect myself, or, whatever it is, whatever works for you. I'm totally lovable. I'm a wonderful human being, or whatever it is. And sometimes if we have grown up with a lifetime of hearing the negative stuff, those positive messages sounds like almost kind of ridiculously Pollyanna-ish. And I will tell you, if you just practice those, and I think I recommend to my clients to write down a few affirmations, and those are I statements, right? I am whatever, some positive thing, and put it on your mirror, put it on your desk, or where you see it every day. And it kind of gradually starts to work to rewire that, you're recoding that software, and there is a change. So I understand, that it sounds like there's a whole lot of stuff hitting you at once, and that's particularly hard when there's accumulation of stuff. But I'd really look at that and see what you can do to tease out those beliefs about yourself that are there, and then see what you can do to change them. And being a victim, by the way, is another one that's just really, bad things happen to us in life. But like this thing, one of the things I talked about is what do I have control over? What do you have control over, and how can you take responsibility so you don't have to feel like a victim? So there's things we can do, and I'd encourage you to look at those. And also, finally, just to be gentle with yourself, because if you've been beaten up by all these negative core beliefs, we believe it, and so just kind of be gentle with yourself while you're in this transition phase to kind of more positive ideas about yourself.
And I concur. There was a bunch of things, but one of the things I thought of was those old core messages. And for me, it still can be. I can go to the oh, I'm such an idiot, and I've learned that as soon as I hear that, that thought, that I have to go. No, that may not have been my best choice in whatever I did, but that doesn't make me good or bad. So I take it out of that. It's personal. I'm human. I fail, if I want to call it that, on a daily basis on some level. But I also have some things that I do really well. And so for me to be kind to myself, one of the things I thought of too is, I don't know where you're in the program, but if you haven't done your 4th and 5th step, highly recommend that, because this feels like a lot of stuff that would get cleared out, in doing the step work. So would really encourage moving forward. Charlie Rizian did a series, and it's on the sexandrelationshiphealing.com site. Under resources, you'll see video library, and she did a brilliant job of working through the steps. But like, there's such freedom in getting through, all that clutter. I'm going, great, you're working with a financial coach. So perhaps change the lens from, I've got some financial difficulties, is I'm doing something positive to change that narrative. That's awesome. Lots of people just keep going down that rabbit hole. So love that you're doing, something, really positive with that. You're here. Great.
Exactly.
I mean, like, I'm very practical, very pragmatic. So, I would encourage you to write down 3 things, like Dr. David said. What are things that I can have some control over? What are 3 things I'm grateful for? I cannot be grateful and feel, like a victim at the same time. Those are contradictory emotions. So the more I can focus on, on something positive, it's like the news. I said, if I'm watching something that's more difficult or negative, I'm making sure I'm inputting, hopefully twice as much in the positive category as well. So, but thrilled you're here.
And I want to mention just one more thing, because you talk about financial coaching. There is something, I'd say that the 2 things that are probably most triggering for people are sex and money. And so finances are a big deal, and they trigger all kinds of stuff in us. And you mentioned them being frozen. I think that seems like fear to me. And so you might want to have somebody talk to about managing some of the feelings that are coming up for you. So yeah.
So this is out of the chat. I'm going to throw this one in there because we're talking about core beliefs. If we have these core beliefs, are we subconsciously seeking out partners that will end up confirming those?
Yeah, I'd say there's a good chance of that. If I, and this is not a conscious thing, right? We have these little built-in, like, finders in ourselves that kind of seek out people, and I'm sure you've all had the experience of, like, there's really kind of magnetic attraction, right? Well, sometimes that's not such a healthy attraction underneath it. And so I think, yes, we can find people that kind of fit. It's like we have a receptor, and they fit perfectly. And so that's why I always say, and some of the choices we make in our addiction are not the choices we would make in recovery, right? And so I think when someone gets into recovery, the people in our lives have to go through some adjustment as well. And some of them maybe can't bend enough to do that. But the short answer to your question is yes, I do believe that they find us, we find them. I'm not sure how it works, but oftentimes that's the case.
So I'm going to tell you, and you can go watch Dr. Rob say it directly himself, but he's talked about, like a 10 and a 2 is going to find a 10 way too boring, and a 10 is going to find a 2 way too chaotic. So we find people that fit with us. However, he also says, those people can grow. Dr. Stan Tatkin did a great podcast on We Do, and he talks about we together are so much better than, me and you separately. So if we focus on the relationship and what's good for the relationship, and I love that. I've shared that with lots of people, even those that aren't, seeking recovery, because I really do believe that we can grow individually, but as a relationship, and support each other's growth. So it isn't, oh, Dr. Rob wrote Prodependence, Moving Beyond Codependency, where codependents would say, there's something wrong with you that you chose this person. And Dr. Rob goes, gosh, you love this person, even recognizing that they're broken. But, the two of you can grow and change and move forward together better than either of you could individually, if you're choosing to both do that. So go listen to Dr. Rob doing it, but that's kind of it in a nutshell. I hang around with him a lot, can you tell? So the next one, I'm single, gay, and just seems not making any progress, no sobriety. I have no partner and never have. I have been coming to meetings since last May or June. One recovery friend suggests that I just quit. I try to just quit porn, but not worry about masturbation. He thinks it would at least be a little progress in the right direction. What are your thoughts, Dr. David?
So I think when we try to incrementally stop addictive behaviors, I think it just drags out a process that isn't very productive and doesn't usually end very well. In my experience anyway, we have to really cut out all the addiction behaviors. To me, and at Seek Integrity, we treat both chemicals and behaviors. And if you think about it, they're all expressions of the same underlying stuff. So, and it's very common in recovery. I was more of an alcoholic. So when I gave up alcohol, I, kept my cigarettes. That was my little bargaining chip. I gave up that my first anniversary, but I suddenly found myself gaining weight because I was eating a whole lot of sugar. And then I, would spend money I didn't have to get that little kind of sugar high of feeling good about something for 10 minutes. And so my addictive behavior started to kind of creep out in other areas. And mine didn't go into sexual stuff, but that's very common that people do turn to porn or get into sexual acting out. And it's just all the same stuff. And so you're really doing yourself, in my opinion, a disservice to not just quit everything at once and make a clean break of it, because you're keeping that addiction alive. It's kind of smoldering. You may cut down on the different kind of outlets it has, but in many ways, recovery can be kind of a whack-a-mole thing where you give up this and it pops up over there, and you deal with that and it pops over there, and we have to really be conscious of that. So the one thing about masturbation too, for reasons, all kinds of reasons, but we talked earlier about the deep grooves of certain fantasies, and when we're masturbating, we're really activating all that, and I just think it's problematic. So I think my recommendation would be to quit all at once. I'm sure there are some people out there that maybe have been able to do that progressively, but I don't know them, and I think you're making it a lot harder than it would be. And, I think it'd be very discouraging to be not making any progress like that. But I would take a look and see maybe what are you doing to undermine yourself in terms of those behaviors, And for me, when I was doing that, it was more about bargaining. Well, I'll give up this, but I'm not going to give up that. And there was little pieces I wanted to hold on to. And in the end, it didn't work until I let go of everything I needed to let go of. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're here. And I was thinking too, there's something that you're doing or not doing, to me, that is preventing you from being able to fully commit to this, which is really surrender. I'm 100%, it's like when I finally surrendered, and when I have no control over this has control over me, that's when I finally could make progress. But I struggled too with I struggled with an eating disorder after, because particularly sugar, but alcohol is all sugar, so it made perfect sense. But it's really challenging. And today, I've shared this with people that have called. I live in recovery. I do not live in my addiction. I do not have an addiction to sugar or food, and I don't have an addiction to working out or whatever. Like, I have learned to live in that middle. and it's boring on some level, but it's so freeing on so many other levels. And so I just encourage you, keep coming back. And, you know, I mean, we have a great program that really gives people a foundation of recovery. So consider that. There's great therapists that can help. I mean, if there's something that I can do to be of a resource, don't hesitate to reach out.
And Tammy, when is cruise control?
I'm sorry? Cruise control group is Tuesday nights. I think at 5 p.m. Pacific time, but don't hold me to that. Okay. It's Tuesday nights, because we've got 3 meetings on Tuesday nights. We've got the female sex and love addicts, the cruise control, and also the men's partner group. So
so cruise control is a gay men's discussion group on sex and relationship healing. Yeah,
and Skip Spear does a great job with it. So so check it out. So I am finding with home isolation that there are stimulations other than porn that attract me, ads, etc. Porn has never been my issue. I'm older and sober in my S group.
Okay. Good for being there. You know, I think being at home, we're all kind of adapting. I do worry about people that are active in their addictions, porn addiction especially, being right now at home and having been in the computer so much and being isolated and sometimes unaccountable. But I'm not sure if you mean the ads stimulate you in a kind of an addictive way.
To me, so here's where I'm taking this is because I'm isolated now, there's more things that are feeling triggering. So maybe even not just the ads and whatever. So let's talk about if I'm isolated, you know, what's happening with my brain and temptation or boredom or whatever.
Gotcha. Okay, so let me frame it like this. I look at sex and porn addiction and chemsex as intensity addictions, right? They're all about some amount of intensity and changing our moods through excitement and titillation and stimulation. And I think sometimes when we're in a situation like now, kind of locked down and without some of that level of stimulation, we hunger for it. Our brains hunger for diversion and distraction. And so it probably makes sense that ads or Facebook or social media starts to be appealing. Now, the thing about social media, you know, Facebook and Instagram, you know, they're G-rated, right? But a lot of guys look to those images and use them to kind of get aroused a little bit. They're just needs to be triggered. It'd be very triggering, and so I'd be really conscious of that and be cautious about that. But I think what I think right now, in that we're not out and about, we're not doing our lives, so there's this need for kind of stimulation and intensity. So we're starting to notice or get it from other places, like ads or whatever. But I would just, you know, despite the isolation, I just really recommend staying connected with your support systems and your meetings and groups and talk about this, because this way of living is a real adjustment for everybody, and we're all kind of finding our own way through it day by day. So I would definitely share your situation and get some feedback on it from your peers.
Yeah, and I think like the whole, I'm paying attention to that ad and what can I go do differently, you know? So I think it's like we were talking about earlier, it's interrupt those tracks through the snow, you know? I'm noticing that. Oh, great, you're noticing it, you know.
You know, and I guess what I would say, because you say you're sober in your S group, I would look at your outer boundary elements. You know, what feeds you? What makes you feel good? Is it a walk? Is it being mindful? Is it playing with your pets? A hobby? You know, I would go to things that give you joy and comfort in this time.
Yeah, and gratitude. So, okay. Next one, my husband is several months into recovery and he's been doing pretty well. His therapist has diagnosed him with ADHD and attributes a lot of the addiction to that. He was prescribed
Vyvanse.
Thank you. I was going to say, I'm going to get that wrong, but I'm wondering if going to a stimulant is a terrible idea for a porn addict, and I'm hearing conflicting opinions. He has not had any substance abuse issues, at least not yet. What's your opinion on this subject? You're asking the right guy.
Yeah. So in my experience, giving a stimulant to an intensity addict is not a great idea. And it's really black and white, clear cut to me with meth or, you know, other stimulant users, meth or cocaine addicts, Adderall. We don't want to give them it just lights the fire. So I really would be cautious about that. One thing now, ADHD is a serious problem and can be really problematic, but there may be other alternatives that can be helpful with drugs that are maybe perhaps have less potential to be triggering. And there also, by the way, is the best outcomes for many things, depression, but ADHD included, are a combination of medication and therapy, psychotherapy. And there's a very effective form of psychotherapy for ADHD called cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a very common therapy, but it's very effective. And so, and the best results are when people learn how to do cognitive behavioral therapy in combination with the medication. And there are other medications that are not stimulants. So I'd at least have him have a chat with his provider to see, because sometimes people don't understand how they can be really triggering. Vyvanse is a great drug. I mean, it's new and it's, really effective, but it may not be the right drug for everybody. And I worry if it's prescribed to somebody who has a porn addict or a chemsex addict particularly.
Yeah, and we've talked before that ADHD is fairly common in the addiction. Yeah, there's a lot of, I was diagnosed with a mild case, not surprising. So there's a lot of us that, struggle with that. So, okay, next one. As an alcoholic, I am getting triggered lately because restaurants and bars that deliver in California have been approved to deliver alcohol, including mixed drinks. I realize I'm upset because as an alcoholic, I don't think it's fair that other people get to partake and I don't. And I completely understand that I'm thinking from an addict brain even after 6 years. And now the World Health Organization is telling people to play video games for connection when previously they recognized it as an addiction. I find it really hard to let that shit go.
Right. Yeah, I know. I understand. And I think it's easy to fall into resentment, which is not a great place for us to be. But yeah, it's the rules of the game have changed right now in the world, and temporarily at least. And so these weird things are happening that didn't used to happen. And certain kinds of addictive behaviors are being kind of enabled. I was surprised. I live in Florida, and they were talking about what businesses stay open. It was, hospitals and veterinarian for animal emergencies and liquor stores. But I guess actually people, if they go into withdrawal from liquor, that could be a dangerous situation. But I mean, it's out there. And so I think we just have to do what we need to do for us and let go of all that stuff out there. I do worry that if we're promoting video games, and because I think video games have great potential to be problematic for people. I have many meth clients who started on video games. And so, yeah, I worry about that too. And there are certainly I guess you can play video games with other people, and that's a form of connection, but I sure would recommend face-to-face contact on Zoom or some other platform as opposed to playing with somebody in a game. Yeah, so I understand your frustration, but it is what it is.
I do too, and I 100% agree with the games. I'm kind of concerned about, actually I am concerned, it's a giant research project. As far as the alcohol, so I had sinus surgery a few years ago, and I realized that my dog that weighed less than me is on a higher level of the same med that I was on. I had surgery and he had arthritis, and like I had this little resentment about that. I was like, that doesn't seem fair. And then I went, wait, I gave up my right because I did all my allotment in a very short time frame, and so for me it was like I just have to remember, it isn't about them, it's about me. I have a problem. I still can choose. When somebody says you can't drink, I go, oh yes I can. I just choose not to. I know what it would do to me. And you've got 6 years, rock on, like. I would rather connect with people. If you joined a little bit late, I was doing yoga with my, kids in another state, and, online today. I don't do yoga, whatever, but I was like, that was fun. And, I'm not missing alcohol. I don't want to be sitting here in a stupor, for however long we're, social. I love physical distance. I like that a lot. For however long we're physical distance, I'm still engaged. I'm still engaged in my recovery, and I'm still learning things from Dr. David. So we're out of time, Dr. David. So so to the questions that we didn't get answered, you know, I apologize. We're out of time, and come back again. We'll be, well, probably Scott, but if he's under the weather again with allergies, I'll be back to join you anytime. But there's lots of other things. So join sexandrelationshiphealing.com. You know, keep connecting with us. We're here for you. So
Yeah.
thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Erin. Thank you, Tammy. Good to see you.
Bye.